There are some out there who believe today might be the day that Russia invades Ukraine. This amid conflicting reports that Vladimir Putin is actually withdrawing some troops who have ended their exercises from the border.
Yeah, we want to bring in right now some expert perspective on this morning. We are joined by Dr. Thurber. He's a global conflict specialist at Northern Illinois University, NIU. Thank you very much for coming on the show this morning, Dr. Thurber.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Well, you hear that there is this great big buildup and there's a lot of saber rattling and a lot of conversations. And then all of a sudden we hear some soldiers are going back. So there is a lot of confusion about where do things stand right now. Do we still need to be worried? Do we think that Russia's pulling out of this?
Potentially some good news, but yes, confusing and still plenty of cause for worry. After reports over the weekend that war was potentially imminent, yesterday we've seen Russia in particular step back and say that they're interested primarily in a diplomatic solution and claim that they're willing to pull back some of their troops. That said, we haven't seen that yet, and it still leaves plenty of troops surrounding Ukraine in almost all directions that they could use to potentially launch an attack.
I want to ask you about where we are in the world. This is not the 80s. This is not Russia invading Afghanistan. We've got social media. I watched a little old lady in her 80s on a rifle range with an AK-47. If civilians get involved and they die and the world watches this on their devices, will that put any added pressure on Putin in particular to say, wait a minute, the world is against me on this?
I'm not sure how responsive Putin is to world popular opinion, but I think it is important to think about his domestic audience at home in Russia. I think part of the point of doing this is for him to send a strong signal of his leadership and to rally Russian nationalism in support of his rule of Russia. I think you also bring up an interesting point about the way that we might see Ukrainians respond to this. If Russia were to attack militarily, they certainly have the advantage. I think we would expect to see them be able to conquer significant territory in Ukraine. But we should also expect to see Ukrainians resist in a variety of different ways, using incredibly resourceful means to attack, potentially with guerrilla conflict, with weapons as you described, or potentially nonviolent means such as protests and boycotts.
What would I have a lot of people that ask me, and I see it on social media, a lot of questions like, why do we care? Why should America get involved in this, especially after all we went through with Afghanistan and now this buildup and we're getting ourselves involved in this? Why should America care?
Well, certainly if Russia were to attack, it would be a very violent and bloody conflict. And here in the Chicago area, we have a large Ukrainian community. And for them, this is a very scary situation for those with friends and family back in Ukraine or more generally in Eastern Europe.
But in addition to that, overall, why should the country of America care about what's going on in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a possibility of escalation. Already, the United States government has put 8,000 troops on ready to potentially deploy elsewhere in Eastern Europe, countries probably like Poland or the Baltic states. And this is likely to affect us economically as well, with potential cutoffs and reductions in supplies of oil and gas that could increase gas prices. Now, the Biden administration has been very clear. It's willing to support Ukraine in a number of ways, including sending ammunition and other forms of weaponry to Ukraine, but it has also been clear that it is not willing to send U.S. troops to Ukraine to defend Ukraine against a potential attack.
Quick answer, because we're out of time. Could Ukraine end all this by saying, hey, we just won't join NATO? And that would be the end of it. Or would it not be?
Possibly. And if that's the case, I think that's one of the things that the United States administration in recent days has been pushing them to try to do. The other possibility is that Putin sees that the only way to achieve his interests is through setting up his own dictator puppet regime in Ukraine. And if that were the case, then there might not be a whole lot that Ukraine or the U.S. could do to prevent an invasion.
All right. Dr. Thurber, Global Conflict Specialist at NIU. Thank you for coming on this morning to give us your perspective on this.